Morning,
Recording.
sir.
Morning, sir. How you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah. Someone
Yeah,
didn't someone didn't like one of my workshops the other day.
I can't believe that, Andrew.
Honestly, mate, you didn't like it, or they didn't like it. I don't know. I'm spitting feathers. I'm so angry. And the reason I'm angry is not because someone didn't like it, but the points they made aren't real.
Mm,
Funny that, isn't it? I can deal with any criticism in the world, but don't make stuff up.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Or if you're going to do it, you should make sure you've been listening and you're accurate. It's anyway. That's
yeah.
me.
I know. Who knows? Maybe you hit a nerve with them, and he didn't like it because it was
Mm,
a matter of, oh my God, he's talking about me, and I wasn't ready for that.
yeah.
And it's
I
you
think a
know,
lot of the stuff was that I was a little bit edgy for them, and
yeah,
I
yeah,
think and I can be edgy. That's not the words they use, but it brought me onto something just before we start our podcast that I'd love to just talk about is we live in an edgy world. You know, we
hmm
live in an edgy world, and and when I'm delivering workshops, I mean, particularly the packed workshops where we've got parents there at the end of their tether, we have to speak the truth and we have to cover the difficult subjects.
yeah,
And there are difficult subjects like drugs and alcohol and sex and all these things that we have to talk about because, you know, this is the real world that our families and educators are trying to navigate their way through, let alone the young people themselves.
indeed, indeed. And I think it's proven that it is something people do want to tackle,
Mm,
and very few workshops or very few presenters do actually go into it in the way that you do. And I know that you generally ask, "Is everybody all right with this?" You
yeah,
don't want to make people feel uncomfortable, but
no,
you
100%.
feel it does need talking about, and
Yeah,
there's no point in sort of just fluffing over it. It is This is what we are going through, and this is what
yeah.
we have to deal with.
And it's interesting you say that, Gordon. I won't spend too long because we've got a lovely workshop or a lovely podcast lined up for you today. It's interesting you say that. You know, some of the subjects that I have to cover, self-injurious behavior, you
Hmm
know, that's not a nice subject.
No, no.
And when you start digging into it, when you start digging into self-injurious behavior, you then get into, you know, again, things like, unsafe sex, use of drugs and alcohol as a self-injurious behavior, not as a
Mm.
self-medication, and all this stuff, and yeah, it's interesting. Gordon,
Before we do any further, can I ask you to try and
get rid of
turn
that
around
light.
because
That
that light is affecting my sight, if that makes any sense?
is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want more like that?
That's fine. That's fine.
Uh, I feel like I want to do a workshop on self-injurious behavior, man.
Well, we can do. I'll pitch in and that if you've done self-injury, because it is an important area. We do have a lot of children that do self-harm.
Yeah,
What is self-harm? And how do we um, approach it with our children? Because self-harm comes in all sorts of guises,
mm,
and what we would consider self-harm is like talking about Tourette's, where
yeah,
um, our first thought of Tourette's is somebody that shouts out swear words every
yeah,
2 or 3 minutes and things like that. But actually, self-harm can be as much as picking on the skin at the end of your
yeah,
fingers, and it's
yeah,
really, really painful in that. And
yeah.
we miss that as being a self-harm.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think, gosh, we turn on a sixpence, me and you, don't we?
Well, we have that ability to and knowledge. So, do you want to leave the original podcast? Want to do it till next week, and then just while we've hit on self-harm, look at that or self-injurious
I don't know.
behaviors?
I think we ought to start again, don't you? And make a decision, don't you? Because we've fluffed about all over the place here. Or
Yeah.
do we just carry on?
carry on. I'm sure the
Right.
listeners would love because this is how it comes to being. It's not planned. We don't have
Mm.
scripts.
No, we
We
don't.
will talk about in the middle of the week. Well, we're going to talk about this or talk about
Yeah.
that. But I think it's just we go with what's there. To be honest.
So let's stick with the self-harm, shall we? And we'll look at
So if we're talking,
siblings on another
yeah,
day.
yeah. So if we're
Mm.
doing self-harm or
Mm.
self-injurious behaviors, what's the podcast that we are doing this on? Can you remember the name of it?
Yes, mate, I can indeed. It's called Neurodivergence More Than a Label.
Well done.
Thank you. And
It is.
today it is episode number whatever, and we are looking at self-injurious behaviors. And if we're looking a bit phased, it's because we were going to talk about siblings. So you couldn't get further away, could you? You know,
No,
no.
no.
Now,
Uh,
I just want to say about self-injurious behaviors. Over the last couple of years, have done quite a lot of research into this.
mhm,
I've only ever delivered two workshops, three, but one was to the same group, half and half. And
yeah.
then I did one this week. It went down incredibly well. We had a really positive group of delegates on there, not like some. And now, the reason I'm upset, by the way, is because I rarely get a complaint, do I?
No.
But anyway, we've got this lovely group, and he was self-harming with ligature, so he was using cords and things like that, and it was a very serious issue. The thing is, when you get into self-harm, when you get into the sort of looking at self-harm, the way that self-harm is is not what you're expecting.
It's not
You
at
know,
all.
it's really not what you're expecting. And young people and adults, but obviously we're really focusing on young people. Young people do um, find unusual ways of self-injurious behavior.
Hmm.
So what do you think, Gordon, is the most common reason that I've found for self-injurious behavior or self-harm?
Um, I think it's the reason somebody self-harms is to divert a pain that is somewhere else, whether it be
Mm,
a mental torture that they're doing to themselves and self-talk and
yeah,
they're not liking it, so they'll cause a pain somewhere else to divert that
yeah,
what's going on. And I think that's where the majority of self-harm comes, is a diversion.
yeah, yeah. It does tend to be that. And um, the interesting thing is that um, the one more common than that, yeah, the one that I came across is absolutely it's quite upsetting. Well, it's all upsetting, but creating an opportunity for self-care. So you would hurt yourself, cut yourself, burn yourself, scold yourself, take medications in order to make yourself ill or whatever it is, in order to have an excuse for, not an excuse, but a reason for self-care. And
Hmm.
so that you work on the wounds, you dress the wounds, you do all these things. And that was not even on my radar.
No, I would never have thought so. I would have thought you would say for other people to
Mm.
give them attention,
Well,
but for self-care, that would never have crossed my mind.
no, no, and well, it never crossed my mind. Hang on, let me just. Right, okay, right, okay. So sorry, there's stuff going on with my laptop. Um, Right. So yeah, and yeah, to get the attention of other people, medical attention, family, friends, peer groups and things like that. But yeah, the most common one is self-care. Now, this is from my limited research, and anyone who knows me well knows that I'm not. I'm not the great researcher. I will pick up on things, and I'm very kind of not casual about it, but quite free and loose with it. So, if I'm making a mistake here, that's fine. But this is the stuff that I was finding out. This is the stuff that kept cropping up, and I was shocked. I was
Hmm.
absolutely, absolutely shocked. With your packed work, Gordon,
Yeah,
what I would say is, I know you come in contact with a lot of these
yeah.
self-interest behaviors, but you also have the parents to deal with, don't you?
And indeed, because it is scary when a child or young person decides to inflict pain on themselves in one way or another, and the helplessness of the parents is, what do I do? How do I deal with this?
Yeah,
What am I not doing right?
yeah.
Becomes a big problem. And it's really, really understanding that they're not really trying to hurt themselves for um, a, a reason that life is really, really bad. It's in a bad place, but there's always a justifiable reason for them doing something. And how do we get to the heart of it to then um, tackle the idea of, is there another way that we can express our feelings? Because again, I think it is it's done on the feelings of how they are,
Mm,
and I whether it's self-care or whether it is a diversion, it is to get rid of something else that is troubling them, and
mm,
it's finding out what is that trouble,
yeah.
and moving on. And I think it's a little bit, and again, this is not research, but and it's probably just very, very surface stuff. But it's a bit like your habits in that you're never going to get rid of certain habits. You just have to find a different one. So if something is like you're sort of saying your alcohol or drug abuse
Mm,
is becomes a habit. Now we're not saying you have to get rid of the habit. We have to get rid of the harmful part of that habit, which is your alcohol or
yeah,
your drugs,
yeah.
and replace it with another habit. And I think this is replacing this feeling with understanding it and expressing it to
Mm,
reduce.
mm,
And that's the work that we need to do with the parents, because to try and sort of say, stop doing this, why are you doing this? And if we're not careful, the way we come across explaining to our children or asking them, it's almost an element of blame. Why are you doing this? What is it? When actually what we're doing is exploring,
yeah.
but it will be taken as you're blaming me for this again, and I can't help it, and therefore we're further embedding the need to self-harm, really, in
Well,
my opinion.
I think you're 100% right. And I think what you did hit on in there was sometimes these things just stop.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something. I was just thinking about this as a child. I used to bite my nails, pick my skin. Now I know that I have stimming and tics.
Hmm.
And I think that was a massive kind of, if you could see me, my hands right now are going crazy. And I have stimming and I have tics and I have all these things. But what is interesting is that this behavior just stopped, just stopped one day
Hmm.
when my drugs and alcohol stopped. Incredible. Where's the connection? Who knows? But that picking and things like I never do it. I've always got, perfect nails, perfect skin, and well, good enough, and
Yeah.
and and so sometimes we have to say to people, this will just come to an end, and not just the self-interest behaviors, all sorts of things. Um, we have we have things like, I used the Einstein thing in a workshop about the fact that supposedly we don't know he didn't speak till he was 7, and a
Yeah.
lot of families of children who don't speak yet, yeah,
Yeah.
really latch onto that Einstein thing. They nearly always know it. What they don't know is what he said. Supposedly again, It's probably not true, but I choose to believe it. And it's a great comparison for autism and children who don't speak yet. Is the line was, you know what it was. What did he say?
No, I can't remember.
And how many workshops for PACT have I put this in?
I know,
It's
I know. Yeah, I was thinking, he's going to ask me, and I'm racking my brain, and it's not there.
it's this soup is cold.
Thank you.
Was now that's because he had nothing to say.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And Einstein went on to be a great public speaker and, as well as all the other things he did, but he could talk about this, a great communicator. And so I know I'm kind of stretching a point, but that not speaking yet and those self-injurious behaviors sometimes fall on the same level, you know. I'll stop when I stop. Um,
Yes.
and uh I was we used to have the house at a Airbnb room. Um and we had a woman's we had a right, okay. We had a guy, he was a granddad,
Hmm.
he was a former head teacher actually, and he used to rent this room and he'd have his granddaughter here. We had a little cot in here. And because we got the patio doors, they'd go out, and so they had the garden to themselves. So he used to come when he visited. He'd come here, and he'd have the granddaughter for a couple of days. His daughter, yeah, mum to the child, uh, she came to visit, and they were all in the garden. She came to the front door, rang the doorbell, said, "Oh, they're out in the garden," and she was covered in cut marks on her legs. Absolutely. I mean, you couldn't have found another spot. You couldn't
God.
have found another spot. And I was really good. I didn't stare, but she was quite sensitive. She said, "Excuse that." She said, "It's from my past." And I said, I genuinely, really, didn't particularly notice. And I said, of course, this is so me, isn't it? I said, "What do you mean from your past?" And she said, as soon as I had whatever the little kid's name, it just stopped. It just
Yeah.
stopped. And I'm not saying that's going to happen for everybody, but it does happen to some, and it does happen to some.
It does. So we've got people that are exploring. Um,
Yeah,
I'm going to sort of I don't understand this, so I'm not going to speak in any kind of authority. But there's a group of people like goths, but they're not goths, they're called emos.
yeah. I've been
Tim-
listening to the music. Midwest emo, mom jeans. Come on, the boys. My boys tell me all this stuff.
Yeah, and I know Isaac mentioned it the other day in the car when we
Mm,
were coming back from Manchester, and he was on about the emos and that. And I remember conversations that my children were having when they first started talking about the emos,
yeah.
and they just like to cut themselves or do things to feel something.
Well, emo
Um,
is short for emotional.
yes,
So, but I am an expert on the emos. I'm loving it. They're playing me this music. The boys aren't hurting themselves, although one of them has got questionable medical attention for his ingrown toenail. But you know,
um,
but yeah, this is interesting because um, part of that, and again, this is only what I've been told. Part of that is to do with hyposensitivity,
mm,
hyposensory. Now, if you don't know what hypo is, and I know you do, when we think of autism, a lot of the time we've got hypersensitivity. And the hypersensitivity is, I always say the worst environment on the planet for an autistic person is Lincoln Christmas Market, because basically Lincoln Christmas Market is noisy, smelly, or it's been shut for a couple of years now. But I always, one of my lads is very sensitive to sensory overstimulation,
yeah.
and he always says, "Just bring me back a sausage." So that's fine. but what we're talking about is hypo, undersensory.
Undersensitive.
Now, we used to have forgive me, everyone, but this is, you get through the day as best you can. And we used to have a saying in one school about a little girl, she needs a bomb up her backside. Yeah. What people were saying was she actually just needed lots of sensory input to get a reaction. And so in autism, lots of sensory input to get a reaction, and then you link that up, don't you, to the self-injurious behaviors,
Yeah, yeah.
and uh, um, and so I don't want to sort of go too much into this emo thing
No, no, I
because
don't, because
no,
it was just a thing that sometimes you have to look at it. It's not self-injurious.
mm,
It's just a way of wanting to try and feel,
yeah,
and they're not doing it for attention necessarily, but it's a matter of I'm doing this because it's doing this, and
yeah,
actually it could be I'm
mm,
finding it quite comforting,
yeah,
um, in some cases.
yeah,
And is it a cause for concern? Well, it's obviously a cause for concern,
mm,
but is it something that is going to lead on to more damaging things, and maybe not, and our again, our reaction because of how we have been programmed, is, oh my goodness, this is something really, really horrible, we need to get on top of this.
yeah.
And sometimes it's just a matter of acknowledging where we are, and looking for something else to divert, without making it a major issue,
Yes.
but be aware of it, and tackle it. So we have children that say, "I want to kill myself. I want to
Mm,
do this. I want to do that." And sometimes these horrible words that we hear as parents and think, "Oh my God, what's going on here?"
mm,
It's just a way to stop us in our tracks, for them to take control
yeah.
of whatever was going on there. They don't actually mean they're going to do anything in that. It's but a matter of, I'm going to take some really drastic action to take control of what's going on, because this is what I need to do.
Have you
Uh,
ever jumped into an icy bath?
Strangely enough, a plunge tank twice. Why I
Mm.
would have done it twice? Once was enough.
Yeah. Well, think about this, right? Yeah. People absolutely swear by it, don't they? That they jump into an icy bath or plunge tank or things like that.
So you know Bev, our at Pact,
I don't think I do I?
don't you? I'm sure you've met her. Yeah, I'm sure you have. Yes, you have. Um, she bought a plunge pool type thing. So she has an icy bath type thing at least 2 or 3 times a week, out
Really?
of choice.
Out of choice. That's interesting, isn't it? Do you know why? Why I'm saying this? It's because people who do it say it really clears the mind.
Yeah.
Really, really clears the mind and really helps them to focus. Yeah. And then we get maybe an autistic person, or it doesn't have to be an autistic person, who goes into a boiling hot shower as a form of self-injurious behavior to cleanse their thoughts.
Mm,
It's a fine line between between massive sensory interventions to between massive sensory interventions and self-injurious behavior. It really, really is,
mm,
and so we've got, there is an understanding in there. For me, there is absolutely there is an understanding in there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Go on. Sorry.
No, I was going to say we've seen children, and I don't know if you've done it yourself, but when things are getting really, really on top of them, start hitting their head or slapping themselves and
Yeah,
things like
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
to try and take away this pressure.
Mm,
Um, and they do it so hard. You think, oh my God,
mm.
stop doing that. You're going to hurt yourself. And you can see the indentations and things like
Yeah, yeah.
how much they're hitting themselves, because the pain up here is so much, is that by doing that, it's diverting again. And the potential problem is there was a lady did a talk for us. I can't remember her name at this minute in time. It may come to me. Sort of Newbold, a lady called Newbold. I can't remember her first name. And she was saying that sometimes it's a secondary pain, is that um, people will try and take away a pain that people don't know are there because the child can't verbalize. And as a so let's say it was a toothache and somebody hasn't got, as you were saying earlier,
Mm,
and the ability to talk or choose not to talk, whichever the case may be,
mm,
and to sort of say, I've got really bad toothache or whatever, and so they're forever hitting themselves in the face, and
mm,
people are thinking that they're hurting themselves or things are getting too much, but
mm.
actually they're trying to say, I'm in pain somewhere else, and understanding that. So some self-injuries is another way of communicating to sort of say, I'm in pain.
So what about tattoos?
Yeah. So as you know, Sam's covered in tattoo. Well, not covered, but he has quite a few tattoos.
As you know, so do I.
Yeah. Mandy has tattoos.
Mm.
And she was 40 when she got her first tattoo, and her and her friend um thought, I think it was to annoy me, to be honest with you, because I don't necessarily like tattoos. But they got for the 40th birthday, they got a tattoo on their foot. And Mandy's went infected and was in agony for ages. And it took her
Sorry,
10 years to get her second tattoo. But then she said, oh my God, it's addictive. I just love the feeling.
yeah, I've got to agree with her. I have to agree with her. There is something quite pleasant about the pain that
No.
yeah, and I no, and I get that. I absolutely get that, and and there is something quite pleasant. And in fact, me and my son Isaac, this is the difference between me and you, Gordon. We're having a boys' day out, going to go and get a couple of tattoos.
Yeah, that's never going to happen with me and Sam.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. But
Mm.
it's a different kind of parenting, isn't it, really?
Oh, yes.
But but we do it, there is an element of that. Having said that, yeah, I mean, I had an operation, and I had an operation in a rather sensitive area, and and I have never known pain like it. And
Yeah,
I have said, if I had to have that operation again to save my life, I wouldn't do it.
gosh.
I mean, I probably would, but do you know what I mean? I always say it was just the most unpleasant feeling ever. And then we go into this again, reasons, reasons behind it, So one is for thrills and one is to make you well,
Yeah,
you know. And the thrills one, certainly for me, I enjoy a lot more, you know. Getting a tattoo, fantastic, lying there, focusing and all the rest of it. And it's kind of interesting. Also, so those reasons behind it, there are people who we know of who do it because they feel guilty in some way.
yeah.
Now, famously, uh, James Dean. Now, I'm an age now, probably a load of people don't know who James Dean is. James Dean, I was going to say he's a lot like Elvis, but they probably don't know who he is either. So, so James Dean was a movie star in the 1950s, and he died very young in a car accident or motorbike accident, one of the two. But
Mhm.
he was the epitome of the disaffected teenager. He was your emo of the 1950s. He was
Yeah,
you know, and he was incredibly good looking. And he was always compared to Elvis Presley, who was the music of the 1950s, the rock and roll star. James Dean was the movie star, and they were very similar characters. Rebel Without a Cause was one of his films, and so you get the idea of him. He could not handle the fact that he was so wealthy and successful, and he used to pay people to hurt him.
Yeah.
And and you could step away and say, James, you have everything in your life. Why are you doing this to yourself? And the answer is, it's because I've got everything in my life, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so there is that guilt thing, that guilt thing that goes on. There's also different types of self-injurious behavior. So we talked about, a hot shower. That's easily concealable, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very, very easily concealable. And um and your parents are hardly likely to find out, are they?
No.
So there's a lot going on in there. And like yourself, I don't claim to be the expert, but what I do know is it crops up a lot in my work. The other thing is, as you rightly said, we don't try and stop people. You know, we try and divert them. The diversion's a big one. I had one the other day, by the way. I was delivering this workshop that I'm talking about, and the guy said, he said, I narrowly avoided a young person self-injurious behaviors. Yeah,
Mm.
and he said, and I said, how did you do it? He went, I saw something was about to happen. I'm not going to go into detail because it's not very nice, but I saw something that was about to happen, and I brought them out of their room and got them to help me with something that they were doing downstairs. It was in like a care facility. Um, that is one of the best strategies you can use, getting them to change their environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
And it's so true. And if we look at the violent behavior,
yeah,
and we I would confront Sam to sort of, don't do this. Why go
mm,
on like this? This isn't fair. Leave me alone. Get lost. And I'm still
mm,
there talking to him, etc., etc. And then you get the punching of a door, punching of a wall, punching
yeah,
a tree, and it's a matter of, why are you doing this? Well, actually, the punching is, as Sam has recently divulged to me, is that I needed to cause a pain to try and get rid of my anger, because I could see where this was going, and so I'm hitting something to get rid of my anger,
mm,
because it's painful, and I want to do that. So where we've got holes or had holes in doors and that, it wasn't because he wanted to damage anything. He was
no,
wanting to cause himself pain to
mm.
divert the anger.
Yeah, and again, it was funny because on this workshop there was a woman there, and I happened to mention I'd read a biography of Sid Vicious, and and she'd read it as well. This is what was interesting. So we were having a good old jabber about how interesting it was.
I bet you
Very,
were.
a very, very interesting book. But biographies are always a bit dodgy as to how well they're written. But this was a good book, and he used to partake of self-injurious behaviours. So if you remember punk rock, God, we are old, aren't we? They had a thing called the pogo. Do you remember what the pogo was, Gordon?
Um, so was that just jumping up and down and it
Just
hitting and into walls and things like that?
Yeah, yeah, just jumping up and down and doing all that stuff.
Yeah,
What Sid Vicious would do, yeah, he would purposely pick on the hardest looking bloke in the room, and he was a skinny little fella, really, wasn't he?
yeah,
But he'd pick on the hardest bloke in the room and jump into him and push into him and try
yeah.
and start a fight because he wanted to be beaten up. He wanted to be beaten up, and he would also carve things into his chest with a
Yeah, was
razor
it
blades.
razor blades and safety pins, wasn't it, they used to use as
They
well?
used to stick them in, yeah. But so he would do all this stuff, self-injurious behaviors, And when you read the book, this man had a lot of things worth escaping from.
Mm,
You know, this guy was struggling with life and had a dreadful, dreadful childhood. I mean, the most appalling childhood. I think Johnny Rotten, John Lydon, said he witnessed Sid's mum buying him heroin for his birthday.
Yeah.
And so this guy had got a lot to escape from. Are they giving us a message? Who knows? Do you know what I mean? A lot of the time they are. Help me, help
Mm.
me, help me in this situation because you know, this is my message to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, very, 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 very interesting guy, but also an interesting subject when you dig down into it.
It is, and again, we did communication in school, but communication in children, they're communicating to us about something. Doesn't necessarily mean because they're self-injuring it's a negative, but
No.
they're still communicating. We have to find out what is it they're trying to communicate,
Mm,
because there's a lot of children, and we're not going really deep into this because I don't think we're the right qualified, but we can within our parents and understanding of talking to parents a lot, and from our own children's um, experience, because Sam certainly self-harmed himself,
mm,
Lily in other ways, and we'll talk about these little bits of what we wouldn't do. But I think there's a lot of children that either feel very, very lonely, or they
mm,
feel that nobody likes them, or why am I so different? I don't understand it. And
mm,
they will start doing these things like you mentioned, picking your fingernails and then picking the skin around them. And they're really red raw, and they're very, very painful. Or they'll start to, girls in particular, but start pulling their hair and pulling
yeah.
it out. And then that
Well,
becomes that actually has a name now, doesn't it? Where they're
I
pulling the
don't
hair.
know, but I know one of my kids used to pull his eyelashes out,
Yeah, yeah.
you
And
know.
it's
Go on,
it,
sorry.
no, it is something that that sort of side of things, and I think the smaller self injuries are the ones that we need to be paying more attention to, because I think that is where
Mm,
the child is troubled, and they're not sure. So they start picking and pinching themselves. Then the skin breaks and it gets bigger, and they keep picking that, and then they go into another bit because actually this I feel this and I can deal with that because I'm now focused. But I do think the smaller sort of self injury type things are the most damaging for our children, because they're struggling with something and they're trying to conceal and hide it more.
mm. Okay, yes, I would agree with that. And I'll tell you what we haven't talked about, and that is links to suicidal behavior and suicidal thoughts.
Mhm.
And again, through a lot of the research I've been looking at, uh, the link is not as great as you might think.
No, I would agree with that.
It's not, so uh, people who have suicidal thoughts and etc. are not necessarily, sorry, people who who partake in self injurious behaviors may not necessarily, it's not a given that they will have suicidal thoughts or suicidal attempts and acts.
Mm.
That's not the case. Obviously we have to be cautious, and obviously if you have any concerns about your child, you need to seek medical help. um and that's certainly not us two. But uh you know I'm not going to say to people don't worry and don't be concerned because this is not going to happen. What I'm saying is it's not as likely to happen as you might think. But for every plus, there's always a minus.
Yeah, yeah. And I think if our children verbalize that they have these feelings,
Hmm.
we don't ignore them. We
No.
do go for that help, but it's not something that from and I'm talking more than 50 families and children that I've had this conversation about. It's not something that we're sort of saying that child is not going to harm themselves in the way of trying to take their life and things like that. They are saying things because they're sort of saying, I am struggling with this thought. I am doing this. Please, can you help me?
Yeah.
Rather than I'm going to carry it out.
Hmm.
It's the person who doesn't verbalize and hiding all these things, that's the ones where I'm saying we have to worry. And if our children are brave enough to sort of come out with that, and there are a lot of children that do say, um, I've had voices in my head and they're telling me this, etc. They're sort of saying, I don't like this voice, and I don't know how to deal with it. Please help. But we're taking it as, oh, you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to harm yourself. Actually, they're not wanting to do that at all. They want to say, stop me, just help get I don't understand it and I want this.
So, interestingly enough, one of the things I came across was there is an increase in these behaviors, and one of the theories is that young people are playing less contact sports. So, very, very interesting again is, you know, and believe me, I'm I am not sporty. That's just not me. I sort of am. I sort of am. Some years ago, I got very interested in karate, and I wasn't great at it, but I enjoyed it. But you
Yeah.
know what? There was something quite magical about getting the crap kicked out of you on a Friday night. um, and if I say that, it's a bit like the tattoo thing. It's a relatively healthy, safe environment to get these things out. You know,
Yeah.
one of my lads, one of my stepsons, he's really into rugby. You know, and they literally run at each other, don't they? And half kill each other.
Yeah,
You know,
so the Six Nations has just finished
how was
last
it?
couple of
Yeah.
weeks ago, and there was a commentator on there, and they were talking about how they've been out of the game and they're
Mm.
now the commentating rather than playing. And it's and then our question was, do you miss playing? And he goes, no, not really. What I do miss is I miss the pain the following day, rolling out of bed in absolute agony.
Yeah.
That I miss. I lived for that pain.
So I did karate with. I was I was stupid because I didn't think about geography. So the geography is a big part of it. So
Right.
I did karate at Ingham in Lincolnshire. It's honestly, it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there, as they say. And and the problem with that was really close to Scampton Air Base, and we had most of these guys were Royal Artillery military police, Royal Air Force military police. So these were big, hard guys, who didn't really come across as people who that bothered if they kill you in karate, But it's funny you say that. I used to get in the car the next day, drive to work. I can remember one guy broke my rib, and I was thinking about as this guy came at me. Oh, and it was like being hit by a truck.
Yeah.
And then the next day, I'm in the car and I keep laughing about this thing that happened to me. Of course, every time you laugh, there's the old thing, isn't it? Only when I laugh. When's it hurt? Only when I laugh. I'm like, oh, like that. But it was a euphoric thing.
Mm,
It was a euphoric thing. So I can completely understand, when people go, yeah, I missed the pain the next day. Because it's again back to, I don't want to be trivializing anything, but it's back to that whole situation of taking your mind off things,
yeah.
taking your mind off things, distracting, um, and basically uh, taking a negative feeling and trying to turn it into something positive. I was thinking when we were talking just now, and I thought, the thing about um, the thing about tattoos again. I went back to that tattoo. Let's think about this. Okay, you've got to pay money for it. That's the downside. But the upside is if you need to do something like this, you're doing it in a clinically safe, most times, a clinically safe professional environment.
Hmm.
Yes, that bloke with tattoos all over his face and grig is a professional. But, again, I don't want to be trivializing it. But the best thing you can do is distraction techniques.
It is.
So it's yeah, yeah. But
I
what?
think I think
Well,
like everything else, and I know we're coming out of time. I am aware
yeah,
this week, but I think it's like everything else. We have to acknowledge, not ignore, but acknowledge, not make it a blame, not make it something of major concern, but
mm,
just say, I'm interested to find out why.
yeah. I
Can
think
you
you're
help me understand?
yeah,
And then maybe we could look at an alternative.
yeah. I think you're absolutely right. But what do you think, listeners? Get in touch with us. You can speak to me, whitehouseandrew@hotmail.co.uk, and you can speak to Gordon at PAACT support at hotmail.co.uk.
Yep,
Yeah, and so you can speak to us. Thank you very, very much for listening to us today. As I say, it's a big subject. We've only just scratched the surface, haven't we? Um,
we have. And I think we will get somebody on who can
Love
talk about
to.
this
Yeah,
in a much more in-depth way with the
yeah,
knowledge, because I think it's a good one for parents to actually
yeah,
understand as well. I have, as you know, experienced where I've had to get crisis team involved and everything
yeah,
else. So I understand the worries parents have,
yeah.
and I think it is really important, as you have said, and we've said,
Yeah.
we are not trivializing this in any way, shape, or
No,
form.
we're
But
not.
the one thing I think as parents is we shouldn't need to panic straight away,
No.
and it's just keeping on top. And as I say, it's finding out the why.
And can I just add to that, although you won't need to panic straight away, always hit that professional medical professions
Yeah.
because right, okay. So see you all next week, everybody. It's a
Thank
good
you.
chance if our memories work, we're looking at siblings next week, isn't that right, Gordon?
Yes, indeed.
Right,
We'll have to
okay.
remember that. Cheers.
See you later.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Mm, mm, mm. Hang on.